So welcome everyone. I see some familiar faces. I see some new faces. Thank you for joining us for our virtual but very real conversation and talk with Lois Stark, who's the author of The Telling Image, Shapes of Changing Times. So my name is Cyrus Worrells. I'm Director of Programs at the Institute for Spirituality and Health. And for those of you who may be new, first of all, thanks for joining us. A little bit about the Institute. We just turned 65 years old in May, and we have a rich history dating back to the early days of the Texas Medical Center, when a few physicians, in partnership with some active community philanthropists, founded the Institute because they felt that medicine had sort of lost its connection with meaning, with faith, and with spirituality. And we began as the first nationally accredited chaplaincy training program. And then when hospitals began adopting their own chaplaincy training programs, we moved into a period of biomedical ethics and research. And then for the past 20 years, and especially under the last 10 years, under the leadership of our president, Reverend Dr. John Graham, we've adopted a university model of research, education, and service. And I'd encourage you to check out some of our other programming at spiritualityandhealth.org. And our mission through all of our varied programming is to enhance well-being by exploring the relationship between spirituality and health. And one of the questions we often get asked is, what do you mean by spirituality? And we take a very broad understanding of what spirituality means, knowing that it can mean many different things for different people. And I like to share the definition that our President John offers, which is spirituality is our innate ability to connect with one another, with our environment and the creatures of our environment, with the divine mystery that many of us call God, Allah, Krishna, or by many other names or choose not to name, and our connection with ourselves. And I bring that up because I think two other ways to consider the themes that extend throughout all definitions of spirituality are the big picture and how do we make sense of the world. And it is those considerations and that question that Lois will be examining with us today, and that she explores in illustrative detail in her book, The Telling Image, The Shapes of Changing Times. So The Telling Image was granted grand first place in nonfiction from the Next Generation Indie Book Award, and has received three other international book awards. Lois herself, Lois Stark, is an Emmy Award-winning producer, documentary filmmaker, who during her distinguished career produced and wrote over 40 documentaries on architecture, medical research, wilderness protection, artists, and social issues. With NBC News, she covered Abu Dhabi's catapult to the 20th century, the British withdrawal from the Persian Gulf, Cuba 10 years after the revolution, the Israeli Air Force in the 60-day war, Northern Ireland during its time of religious conflict, and Liberia's social split. And amidst all those details, she's just one of the most visionary people that I've had the privilege of meeting. Had the opportunity to meet her first 7 years ago when I was working as a medical assistant for one of the smartest people I've ever met, Dr. Dick Stasny, who described Lois as one of the smartest people he's ever met. So I've greatly enjoyed meeting her. I'm so happy that this day has finally come for her to present. And without further ado, I'd like to welcome Lois Stark.
Thank you, Cyrus, and welcome to everyone. Thanks for your generous, beyond generous words. And thanks to the Institute for Spirituality and Health for inviting me to participate tonight. My salutes to the Institute for all that they do. They help us connect the dots, both within ourselves, between each other, and in the community. And when they do that, they deepen and strengthen our visible and invisible bonds. So a big hats off to Reverend John Graham and all that he does to bring light to Houston, but especially personal thanks to Cyrus. Beyond the touching introduction, he has a gift for like a little lightning rod for meaning and insight, and he brings it to everything that he touches. He was also infinitely patient with me, trying to bring me up to tech standards for tonight. So if the computer gods are with us, it's thanks to him. And if they're not, just count to one, because he has a plan B ready. So also a personal huge thanks for everyone who was present tonight on this call. I know we're all in lockdown, but our lives can be as busy as ever. So it's really very touching to me that you all took the time to be with us tonight on this Zoom call. So we're off for the ride through time, and it might take a minute to kick up the engines, but we'll get there fast as we can. All right, we're off. How do we humans make sense of the world? In something as simple as shape, you can find the key. It's the key to how humans organize and orient. And the very shape of our buildings, behaviors, and beliefs reveals our mental map. Shapes can tell us how humans make sense of the world. As a documentary filmmaker, I was trained to make sense by looking for a telling image, and that's how the title got picked. Some picture that conveyed the essence of the story. I would land in a foreign country and have to find a visual that represented the mindset of that culture. So eventually I found a clue, and it was hiding in plain sight. And that key was shape itself. Once I looked for shape, I saw it everywhere. Shelters, social systems, sacred sites. Shape first popped out for me when I filmed a tribal ritual in Liberia. It was a girl's initiation ceremony, and I noticed that here, women danced in a circle, and that circle dance was in the center of their circular settlement. Then I noticed that thatch huts all around them were also round, and the ceremonies themselves were about human life cycles. So everything in this scene, grass huts, circle dances, initiation ceremonies, had aspects of a circular woven web. Yet the very next day, I filmed in Monrovia, Liberia's capital. And here, soldiers lined up, row upon row, shoulder to shoulder, in perfect pods, looking like graph paper being turned. And they marched in front of generals, also in a straight row, adorned with medals and announcing their place in the hierarchy. Everything here looked like a ladder with straight lines and ranks of authority. So it made me wonder, why did humans go from seeing the world as a web to a ladder? And I realized that a change in shape signaled a change in a way of living, a change in a way of thinking. And it became another way to read history, not as a series of kings and wars, but as a change in shape. So the past that we'll start with our fast forward ride through time begins with the interconnected web and then goes to the linear ladder. Our present moment is shaped as a helix, the icon of today's biological revolution, and a network, which is the icon of today's technological revolution. And at the end, I'm going to suggest a new shape that might be entering our world. So we begin with the web, a time of indigenous cultures. A web is about circles, interconnections, parts woven into a whole. There are multiple paths in a web. It's not the single path of a ladder. It's about equality. All parts on the perimeter are equally distant from the center. And like a spider's web, a vibration anywhere is felt everywhere. So shelters all around the globe imitated the web. On the left, it's the round thatched huts in Central America. On the right, it's domes of bent timber in Kenya. On the top line, you see spheres of straw and mud in Australia on the left and Africa on the right. And the bottom left, they're domes of ice in the Arctic. So you're probably familiar with that shape. But on the bottom right, those domes are made of mammoth bones. And you've probably never even seen that image, but they were found in the Ukraine 15,000 years ago. Sacred sites also repeat the web. Stonehenge is the most famous of these sacred stone circles, but there were thousands of them in the British Isles alone, and they were on every single continent. On the left here, you see Australian Aborigine. He's tracing concentric circles in the sand to express his view of his place in the universe. And on the top right is a labyrinth. And of course, labyrinths appear on every single continent all around the globe. And they trace, as we walk, our sacred inner journeys. In the lower right-hand corner is the medicine wheel of the American Indians. It's built to point to the North Star for orientation, and the center is meant to be used for healing rituals. So these cultures never had contact with each other, but they were all used the same web shape to express their understanding that humans are not separate from nature, they're embedded in nature, and spirit is in all things. Even the language of some of these early cultures replicated their understanding of the world as a connective web. And in the Dogara tribe of Africa, there was no word for you. A word as simple as the difference between me and you did not exist. But the closest translation they had for their word for you meant my other self. So imagine living in a world where the other is you. The Yanomamis lived huddled in the Amazon rainforest, closely woven to each other and to nature. They understood their world as honoring nature, not changing nature. And this way of life existed for 90% of human existence. So how could a world based on the eternal constants of nature possibly change? But it did. Farming was the big change maker. Men learned to plant and plow fields, to control nature enough to have barley sprout near their homes with no need to migrate. And for the first time then, people could survive through 4 seasons in one place. Farming was so successful that populations exploded. and a new order was required to keep track of grain storage and food distributions for ever larger populations. The shape shifted. A ladder model fit the new reality of expanded populations. A ladder is about hierarchy and measurement. Each rung is higher or lower than another. Power is at the top. It's a world of right, wrong, yes, no, win, lose. So the worldview went from meaning to metrics, from qualities to quantities, from web to ladder. And pyramids popped up in every continent as the populations grew. We're familiar with the pyramids of Egypt, literally pointing to their sun god in the sky. This shape says something new and big and different. The divine is now in the heavens, no longer in the earth. Pyramids also appeared in Central America. Some had rounded sides, but they still pointed up. This pyramid in Uxmal was built 3,000 years after the Egyptian ones, but it's the same shape, again, without contact between cultures. In Southeast Asia, there were multiple pyramids on temple grounds. And in India, the pyramids were built at a steeper angle, had different decorations, were dedicated to different gods, but they still pointed up. So shape itself is telling us the political, social, and theological order. In this cathedral in Milan, the pyramid triangle is still evident, making the point even stronger with steeples and spires added. So think about what these shapes are saying. God is kicked upstairs, into the heavens, out of reach, and you need a priest or a king to tell you what God is saying. Today's skyscrapers announce their place and power in the sky, as pyramids did in earlier times. This is Dubai's skyline, where buildings are so high, they look down at the clouds. It's an eerie image that changes our notion of what is up and what is down. In this quick chart of buildings with a ladder mentality, we go from Egyptian pyramids to the Empire State Building to Kuala Lumpur's Twin Towers, which for a time were the tallest in the world. But then look at the last picture on the right. It's built low and close to the ground, and that's Microsoft's headquarters. It signals a change in shape is a change in thinking, and it's not a coincidence that this Microsoft building is about computers. The computer is the change agent to the next, just as farming was the change agent from web to ladder eras. The computer chip has ladder lines, but it catapults us to connectivity in a whole new dimension. A helix actually combines a web and a ladder. It both revolves and evolves. DNA's double helix both twists like a web and has the crossbars of a ladder. And DNA's helix is nature's way to tell the story of life, death, rebirth, past, present, and future. You know your children and grandchildren will carry some of your genes, but you still don't know what they'll look like. DNA takes the past, mixes it in fresh combinations, and passes them generation to generation. So the double helix of DNA answers the riddle of how things can recur without repeating. In this shape, both pattern and the unpredictable are both at play. On the left is a diagram of the chakra energy points in our body. Health is visualized as energy flowing in a helix through our body chakra points. balancing mind, body, and spirit. On the right is the emblem of medicine, the caduceus. It's also a helix made of two entwined snakes. Why snakes? Because snakes shed their skin, so they're a symbol of renewal, healing itself. The helix is an architecture as well. The Guggenheim Museum in New York is a helix on the outside and the inside. The inner rail, when you're standing next to it, looks like an apple being peeled in one stroke. Even the floor spirals, so it upends our expectation. There are no flat floors, no flat walls, no square galleries. It changes the very way we orient. In Singapore, this grass-roofed building twists like a helix. Inside is a multi-story glass building, yet the building disappears to the eye, camouflaged under the green roof. In China, each floor of this helix apartment building twists, so each apartment can catch its own direct angle to the sun. Now picture the double helix with its crossbars and swirling sides, and imagine it bursting open. You have a network, a shape of today's technological revolution. Networks are wild with reverberation, interconnection, possibilities. Power is in the hubs, but there are multiple hubs, not the concentrated power at the top of a ladder. The more links to a hub, the more power it has. And if you lose some hubs, the system keeps on going, not like a toppled ladder. Networks may seem like a web, but the earlier web was flat with one center. Networks link endlessly in all dimensions at once, constantly reverberating, and they master our daily lives as we rely on the internet to bank, shop, socialize, learn. It's even changed the way we think. Now network thinking replaces linear logic. The current generation thinks by hyperlinks, no longer lines of progressive order. Network devices will affect the minds of children in ways we cannot even imagine. This is the exterior on the left and the interior on the right of a new structure in New York City called The Vessel. It's in a Hudson Yard neighborhood. It's a gathering place for people to interact, like the old town square. But this new gathering place is a network of pathways. It's filled with choices to go right, left, up, or down. And these are bacteria colonizing. They're networks. They organize in a wild variety of forms, but they're all network formations. In response to stress, bacteria create partnerships. So there's a lesson here. Bacteria have survived 3.5 billion years, so they can teach us the shape and value of cooperative systems. We're all too familiar with the coronavirus, replicating quickly and widely. COVID-19 uses the web power of connectivity passed person to person. And in that, it's a modern version of "you are my other self." But it also uses the network power of contagion, one to many, as we trace contacts in endless ricochets. So we wake up to what exponential change really means. The world can change in a blink. In the web era, humans were nature-centered. In the latter era, We were man-centered, and now we're becoming planet-centered. We needed the latter power of measurements to create the technology that launches us to space. The rocket ship itself even looks like a ladder pointing to the sky, just as the pyramids did. But as the astronaut Edgar Mitchell said, we went to the moon as technicians. We return as humanitarians. So what's next? What new shape can hold differences, diversity, dynamic change, the way that nature itself does? One possibility is a torus, which is the name for the shape of a donut. So picture a spinning donut. It's the shape of a feedback loop, self-regulating, in continuous motion. There can be wild interactions among everything inside, yet it flows in an overall pattern. So it too holds both pattern and the unpredictable at once. Some physicists think the universe itself could be a torus. So imagine seeing yourself coming out of the top of this cylinder. Over the top, you would see an expanding universe. But now imagine yourself folding into the bottom. You'd see a contracting universe. The system holds opposites, expansion and contraction. When you enlarge your lens, what had looked like opposites shift to one elegant whole. The donut shape is popping up in architecture as well. This is a hotel in China, built as an upright ring. It's both above the water and below the water. Its interior rooms have exterior views. And if you wander inside, your view is continually changing. So living in new shapes reshapes our thinking. A plastic exchange building in China is also built as an upright ring, this time on land. And this is the new British intelligence gathering building outside of London. It's the equivalent of our CIA headquarters. But gone are straight lines and flat walls. Even a sense of right and left disappear. The shape encourages communication between departments and encourages looking at situations with different perspectives. But humans did not invent this torus shape. Nature beat us to it. On the left is the magnetic field around Earth, and it's a torus shape. On the right is the magnetic field around our bodies, also in the same shape. The torus shape can even be used for the periodic table of elements. We're of course familiar with the grid as the map of the periodic table, but the exact same sequence of elements can be drawn as a grid, as a helix, as loops, or as a torus, the image on the bottom right. Nature does not change. The map in our mind changes, and how we describe the world inscribes our thinking. This is a thermal image of Earth from space. You see messy, chaotic systems. Clouds twirl in one direction and then another. Oceans swirl in currents and countercurrents. But you see that overall, nature's systems are in balance. The view from above shows that what had looked like opposing forces become complementary parts of a larger whole. So imagine being an astronaut orbiting Earth. Your view continually changes. There's an infinity of perspectives, of changing landscapes, but viewed from above, differences fold into patterns. This view changes our notion of a day. An astronaut sees 16 sunrises in 24 hours. Time itself expands. And astronauts float inside the spacecraft. Again, no up, no down, no right, no left. So our capacities expand, able to move in all directions. From this perspective above Earth, what had looked chaotic from a small lens snaps to the beauty of the big picture. Today, web thinking returns, but in entirely new terms. Green thatched huts become grass-roofed buildings. The interdependency of early cultures becomes the connectivity of the internet. Yet the new wholeness is multidimensional, not the old flat web. We are relearning what the Dagara tribe knew. You are my other self. Yet we relearn our interconnectivity in global repercussions, viral epidemics, financial linkages, cyber attacks. To think out of the box, you need to know the box you're in. Looking at Stonehenge, skyscrapers, and images from space, you realize we have shifted from seeing the world as a repeating circle to understanding it as linear progress, to seeing the oneness of Earth spinning in space. We shape our world, and then it shapes us. But now you can add shape as a key to read the past and glimpse the future. And then you may catch the next telling image. So now we're open for questions, and have at it, whatever you're curious about, both for comments that you have as well as questions you may have.
So we have, thank you so much, Lois.
Thank you.
And we have 70 people on the call. So I think the best way to do this would be for you to type your question in the chat, and we will field the questions that way. So hopefully your noggins are stimulated, and go ahead and write your questions in the chat. And if anybody has difficulty doing that, you're welcome to unmute and tell me, but otherwise. So Laura Calloway said, fantastic, no question, but the quote, "You are my other self." She really loved that, as did I.
Thank you. It says something so fundamental about us that we tend to forget too often, how much we have in common when we live in a society that's always reminds us of how particular we are instead of how universal we are.
So John Graham, our fearless leader, asked, how have religions changed?
I think religions were always symbolic in a way, and understood that what you're talking about is beyond your words, beyond your imagery, beyond your theories, incantations, liturgy. And in that way, when I think Joseph Campbell had a quote that says, "Don't confuse your finger pointing to the moon for the moon." And in some ways, religions are like the finger that points to the moon. There are a variety of ways that they remind us of divinity, they remind us of creation, they remind us of how we're supposed to behave with each other, but then they get locked in their time and sometimes go astray from what became the moon, and the finger and its rules and regulations sometimes take over and dominate. So I suppose the overall answer to how they've changed that relate to the slides that you've seen would be that 90% of human existence, we had an animistic, nature-centered religious ways of honoring nature and honoring our place in it. And then I think when we went to a more ladder structured way of understanding the world, we also saw God as hierarchical instead of interior. And I think for our moment of time, now we have the liberty of integrating all of that again with so many movements, both personally with all the mind, body, spirit initiatives taking place all around the globe, but also technologically we are a little more interconnected, and that adds to the belief in our connectivity and our universal oneness.
So Eugene Cannon asks, well, he said sensational, Lois, and not surprising, first of all.
Thank you, Philip.
And then he asks, or he mentions that you note with prescience in your book that we are at a point of breakdown or breakthrough, and asks, while that may always be true, why does it seem so apt today?
Well, I think we have the opportunity now with COVID being our central organizing global moment to know that we're all addressing the same thing that we're trying to cure. And to break down and break through is, as you underlined, always the opportunity for every crisis. But I think because this crisis is both so personal that each of us face our own mortality, and so universal that it's happening to the entire globe at once, that it does just underline and capitalize that this is a breakdown or breakthrough moment for all of us. And it's a chance to press the reset button, to go to that breakthrough time, even with all of the impositions in illness and in society that has been brought by it. And one of the other gifts, if you take the breakthrough attitude, the gifts have been to teach us what exponential really means. Just in Texas this week, we saw that curve going straight up like a ladder. And if you know that it's not just COVID, but there was at least 3 major exponential issues that we were facing: climate change, joblessness, things that we weren't really paying attention to and thought, well, we'll figure it out before it gets there. But now we see that the magnitude can change in an instant. So I think that, again, gives this moment of choice between breakdown and breakthrough even more emphasis.
So Judith asked how to get a copy of the book, and I will send out a link to the Amazon link to order a copy of the book. So that's for everyone. Stephanie Glenn asked, what can we learn from our ancestors regarding those that resisted the new shapes and social structures that were shifting during their lifespan?
Well, it's the buggy whip question. Those who just wanted to make a better buggy whip probably didn't have a lot of opportunity to pass along to their children and grandchildren. But there is also the caution. We tend to think of that question of our ancestors with technology changes, with economic changes, with developmental changes. But we shouldn't throw out the baby with the bathwater, because there are enduring things, even as there are evolving things. And even as the shapes change, if probably you've all been in cathedrals, which have the very steep angular roofs and the spires, but then many of them also have a rosette window just above the altar. and some of them have the labyrinth on the floor. So these have been inherited from times before, and they aren't completely thrown away. There are aspects of them that are worth preserving and teaching and passing on, even as we go from certain economic and technical realities to the next and the next. And it's like we're at a point of trapeze artists that swing toward each other, and at one point you have to let go of one and then just be sure that you practiced a lot with the net and grab the next. We're sort of at that point where we're at the first grab of that trapeze, but we don't know where it will swing. We don't know how far, we don't know where it will take us, but we're on for the ride.
Shelley Ann James Perellian asked, due to technology, what brain changes can we expect with children today?
30% of our mind, our brain function, is on visual functions. So imagine just how much information is going into our brains from our eyes, way beyond all of our other senses. And because children today are so screen dominant and their stimulus from birth and all the information and storytelling that's come to them, and it's really unknowable, but it's going to be revolutionary and dramatic. And the part that is least known to us at the current moment is what alternate reality and holograms and what reality always has been a little bit of a open question in philosophers' minds. But now it's really going to be a question for children from their screens, from looking at something you don't know what's real and what's not. It's the game of peekaboo, to the ultimate dimension. And just as our bodies react with fear and heartbeat, if you wear one of those goggles and you're on the edge of a cliff, we're still so linked to our visual responses that we really may have a hard time evolving to be to that comfort level with the new technology of holograms and alternate realities to know really what is true. But the other thing that our brains do beside visual functioning, we're highly adaptive, and the neurologies are always making new connections. So that adaptivity in our brains is the point of optimism that we will reach some kind of reckoning, even though that reckoning will change again very quickly to the next and the next. But we will be able to discern at some point, hopefully, before the next and the next come.
So Anne Weisgarber, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, said, "Wonderful, Lois," and asked if you could talk a little bit about any surprise discoveries you had while working on the book.
Wow. I think it helps me to learn to see from all sides. And I worked on it for 25 years, and so there were many discoveries along the way. Sometimes I would just follow what intrigued me, not even knowing why or if it had a relationship to the book. And the one element that seems to have coalesced since I wrote the book is the idea that we need to have that 360, well, it's more than 360 degrees because that's a flat circumference, but that sense of the donut torus way of really seeing from all sides. And I think that our point in time in society is now built on divisions, and we've grown up in a culture of divisions, of those right, wrong, yes, no's. whether they were from society or parental or religion. And this is a very fertile time when we can rethink all those things, not throw them away, but just take them in that next evolutionary step and figure out how to make that that awareness. And it's like a muscle that you have to develop. I'm writing something now that just uses the example on that for the colors black and white, because we use the expression, it's as clear as black and white. It's as plain as black and white. But in our culture, black is death and evil, and white is bridal and innocence. But in Africa, it's the exact opposites. They wear white to funerals, just as Muslims wear white to funerals, Japanese wear white to funerals. They associate white with bones and death. And black is the color of soil and fertility. So it's about regeneration. So even our very obvious, what seem obvious symbols can be rethought and rethought. And as we're in this global world now, just try to realize how many ways there are to perceive.
Stuart Nelson asked, can you comment on the rate of change? Are shapes of our time changing more rapidly as time goes on?
That's what COVID has taught us, if that curve that gets exponential. And it's so hard to appreciate what exponential means, that quadrupling, goes so fast. And yes, it will be difficult because it will be ever more accelerating. It'll be difficult to adjust to, but again, the neuroplasticity of our brain hopefully will help us with that adaptation. And I think that the very screens will give us imagery that can show us the schematics of how to think in 3 dimensions, 12 dimensions, more and more, as well as how to escalate our thought. Even sight, now I go back and look at some old films and they would stay on a frame for like 5 seconds before the next. And now it's just a fraction of a second and our attention's gone. We're ready for the split second change. And that's just one measurement of how accustomed we become to it and stimulated by it. So hopefully the adaptation mode will take over, but I'm afraid that the speed will be vast and rapid.
That's a big question personally for me, is whether we can adapt to the rate of change, whether we have that within us to sort of reach another dimension of adaptation. Carol asked, she said, thank you for bringing this powerful information to us. It is very exciting to hear you tonight, and we love your book. Are you able to suggest ways to bring shapes more consciously to our daily life?
I think if you just take a walk in nature, you will see what are called fractals, and those are self-repeating patterns. So if you look at a leaf, the veins in the leaf have that central line and then all the tributaries. And that's the structure of a tree itself, with the trunk and then the branches and then the limbs off of it. And now that we have pictures from space, you also see those exact same formats in river systems and river deltas. And now as we're able to use technology to photograph inside our bodies, our lungs have the exact same pattern as well. So you can look out your window and see those self-repeating patterns. And the more that you see, the more fun, hopefully, that you'll have shape seeking. So just imagine you wake up in the morning and probably you woke up in a rectangular room and you probably reached for a rectangular device to check your email. And you may have stepped out into your city, which is laid out as a grid. And then you don't even realize how much we are locked into those shapes, which are all around us, that we're numb to notice them. But once you start to play the game of shape seeking, then you can learn to use it for your best intention. So it could be a circular dining room table where more people talk to each other than a rectangular dining room table. So it's there's no right or wrong, but once you have know that you have the choices to go to those different shapes, you can take the one that is most fitting for you.
Hmm. I want to suggest that perhaps you'd write a children's book that could help kids play the shape seeking game. And I've been thinking about how, as you've been talking, how this all plays into education, and right in line with what you just said about choosing our shapes. I think you perhaps answered the question that was posed by Anthony Brandt, who, well, welcome, Anthony. It's great that you're here. It's been a long time.
Thank you for being here.
Yeah. He said, one implication is that earlier humans viewed the world with these shapes and often represented them unconsciously. Now that you are making us more aware of their significance, can we consciously, and I think he meant to say consciously, choose the ones we want to be associated with? Um,
I believe choice is always there, and that's a part of growth and consciousness, to multiply the choices and make them and play them out. I think early humans did know the circular shape because they certainly studied the sun coming up and going down and the exact angles and given seasons of where it rose and where it set. And then they imitated that format with what they experienced, when to migrate during the 4 seasons and such. So I think it was conscious that they had that shape, but it wasn't conscious perhaps in all the ways that we have to be able to express our conscious thoughts and ideas. And also, Cyrus, in terms of what you had said earlier about patterns, there's another quote that patterns cannot be weighed or measured. Patterns must be mapped. So they're a map, but the map is not the territory. So we have this mental map and we have these orders and organization and we think we're set. But every time you go out, you know the map may or may not get you there, and life is going to happen to you on the way. So it doesn't mean it's set. It just is a guideline, and that's always comforting for humans.
hmm. So I want to pose a question, which it kind of has to do with a personal conversation I had with a very philosophical friend recently. And I think a frustration I've had in recent years communicating my version of truth or my worldview, because I feel like it gets mired in perhaps the linear ladder structure of words and all the connotations that words hold with them in the historical context. And I think I tend to see the world in shapes, and think in shapes. But how is it possible? Like we transitioned from a storytelling to a text-based kind of communication, from web to ladder. Is there maybe another transformation in the way we communicate that'll allow us to interact in shapes in some way? Yeah.
I think that could be one of the gifts of this technology that's we're all a little overwhelmed by how fast it's coming to us, but I think it will give us more ways to understand dimensions, other realities, things that are in our imagination, because up to now, we've had largely words, and words are not always the best messenger of the fulsomeness of our ideas. And I was reading something recently about an anthropologist teaching a bonobo chimp how to communicate. And they used these icons. I think there were like 127 icons that the chimp understood, but they were images. And our early writing was like that. They were more these little symbolic things. So then we got locked into language and how we wrote language, and then we locked into words. And the very word shape is both a noun and a verb. And as a verb, we can blow it open and let our minds run with it. So shape doesn't even have to be the ones that we have names for. It can be any number of birthings of new shapes to come that we haven't even created or have a term for. And that's the kind of the verb part of it. And the noun part of it is that we need something to pass between us so we'll both know what we're talking about. So shape does a little bit of web and laddering, if that's the way that you meant the question.
Yeah. Thank you. Kind of in line with, we were sort of talking about education, and Eugene Cannon asked, well, he said, your presentation is restoring my faith in online education. Any thoughts about limits or potential for school and college curricula in a pandemic world?
Of course, COVID is upending everything, but especially education. And there's kind of entwined purposes in schools, knowledge, but also social development. And when you have the video form of it, you maybe can go farther faster with each individual's ability in this kind of virtual world. It's the social piece of it that will have to be recreated. So if that online version of it seeps into traditional education more and more, then I think also the social side of development will have to become equally creative. It may be in school, it may be in other forms of society, but both things need to be answered for the whole child.
So we have one more question here at the bottom. What about, John Graham once again, what about American politics? Where are we? Seems chaotic, certainly divisive and polarized. Can you help us find hope?
I think we're born with hope, and then there are moments of testing where we get, this is a big moment against that, the rubbing rod that polishes us. But I think you have to begin with the hope, and then that sees you through the divisiveness. One reason I'm writing the book on Seeing from All Sides is to get us past that divisiveness, because there are more than two sides of a story, and staying locked in any one point of view serves no one. So it's more than reading other people's news. It's more than talking to people with other ideas, though that's all a part of it. But it's a fundamental muscle trick of the mind to keep spinning the dial and see things in every degree as it changes. And it can be things as simple as the way that like in the West, we read in a horizontal format, and we read on rectangular pages, and we have this sense of progress page to page. But in the East, they have their ideograms in columns down the page, not across the page, and they use scrolls. So use those kind of techniques, and more, just put them in other people's reference systems as well. Even number systems. I mean, people think, oh, you can't argue with numbers, but there's base systems of 2, of 10, of 12, of 60. And they all get the same answers. Some number systems began with 10 because we have 10 fingers, but there's some Papua New Guinea colony that counted 27 parts of their body. And that was their number system based on 27, because they knew all those points on their body. So it goes beyond, you almost have to step back out of politics to get the hope, to see the bigger pictures, to know where you wish things to go, to get the fuel to step back in. And then you have to take each situation in its own terms, like you speak to the child and answer the child's question in terms they understand. And each person's point of view is so particular that you have to find some bridge, some way to begin with that basis of, yes, this is something we accept together. But then, just like the city Venice, which is a city of bridges, you can say it's a city of bridges, or you could say it's a city of islands. So you have to kind of learn to keep flipping, like back and forth, until you play the game enough that it becomes fun and the world becomes larger. It doesn't answer the hard question, but it's one way to sort of make it lighter.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me, and for everyone for their patience through this.
Yes, thank you everyone for joining. Lois did agree to stay a little bit for a few more questions if you'd like, but I want to be respectful of time, and it's 7:04, and we are recording this, so we will send out the recording to all of you, as well as the link to get the book, which is, you saw many of the pictures, but it's a gorgeous book. It's beautiful the way it weaves together the images and the poetic text. So couldn't recommend it more highly.
My last thought to John's question, because it's such a pertinent and vital and difficult one, when you see all those cloud systems going one way and then another, and the ocean swirl, one of the anecdotes that happened to me in China, a Chinese military general asked me my view of the American-Chinese relationship. And my answer was chopsticks. It takes two forces in careful balance to feed yourself and feed your country. So in some way, we have to create those tensions that will serve us instead of divide us.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks to everybody for coming.
I don't know if you can see the chat, but everyone is singing praise and loudly appreciating how much you've offered in this presentation.
We love you, Lois.
Love you all. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, feel free to unmute yourself now if you'd like to, say goodbye and thanks as you're departing.
Thank you. This was fabulous.
Thanks for your patience through it.
It was wonderful, Lois. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Informative.
Well done, Lois.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh man, it was really wonderful. It was so beautiful, and it still is. You're teaching us so much, all the time. I can't wait. You should do this every day now that we're here. It would be great. Brava. Mwah.
Bye.
Well, we will
Thank
certainly, Lois, I certainly hope to have a conversation with you about how we follow up and continue exploring these questions together.
Look forward to that. And the Institute brings so many deep questions and offers personal insights as well as academic insights. It's just a wonderful resource for all of you. So grab onto it.
Thank you. Spiritualityandhealth.org.
Oh, God.
Our cohort hopes you write fast, Lois. Thank you.
Thank you, Philip. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye.
So Lois, I have one more question, and for the benefit of anybody who's staying on, but mostly selfishly perhaps, just around quantum physics and the new understanding that we have for what's real at the most basic level of our material mapping of the universe. And we found that things are much crazier and fuzzier, it seems, than we thought. And while scientists or those who have looked at it sort of know this, I think the general public we are still attached to the shape of the world as matter in terms of what we see in chemistry and physics books, which is like a solar system or billiard balls bouncing around. And we now know that those balls are fuzzy, they're real and not real, they depend on observation, they can be in two places at once, they can be a wave or a particle, and all these things. But I don't think they've entered the collective consciousness, or the implications of them have entered our collective consciousness. And I wonder if part of that is because it's so hard to find an accessible shape to relate to the crazy properties and realities we see in quantum mechanics.
One reason that it's hard to find a shape is because it's dynamic. It's always changing. And the world, even we think that we're solid and we think that our desk is not moving, but in some microscopic way it is moving. So the quantum realities are in motion. And that's another reason that it's difficult to contain in a single shape. So maybe we'll have to use those animations yet to come that will become the pencils of the future and to express these things. The second part of the quantum thinking is that you can be a particle or a wave, but you cannot be both at the same time, as I understand it. So it kind of bears on the notion of choice, how much choice there is in our life to be one thing or another. And the third part of it is that it started with the uncertainty principle. And that word uncertainty has never kind of been used exactly the way Heisenberg meant it, but it's a word that's so real for our time because things do change so fast. But the one part of the quantum thinking that I do like is what is loosely called the butterfly effect, which is that small changes can have big effects. And that part of it gives me faith that our individual actions can affect the whole. And the way that we see that in our moment now is that just wearing a mask, everyone wearing a mask can have this big butterfly, huge effect of at least containing some of the virus spread.
Does anybody else have any questions while we have Lois?
No, but I'm impressed with your ability, Lois, to answer all the questions you've been given. That was good.
Not to say they're the right answer. They're just thoughts in my head.
Right. No, they were very good. Very helpful.
Thank you, Pat.
It was very good.
I was so appreciative of everybody for hanging on and listening.
Yeah.
And to you especially, Cyrus, and the Institute.
Well, thank you so much. You know, like I had said, it's been a long time coming since I think your book was first titled Web Ladder Helix, and you mentioned it
Exactly.
several years ago, and I was captivated. And so I love these there's a shape across time to that of the initial point of our meeting, and hearing about your book and the way it resonated with me and the way it resonates with the themes of the Institute, and this kind of path that it's traced to the current time that we're in, and all the relevancy of the themes of your book. And so it's a like
Well, the whole point of writing is for it to find a home. And so it's so pleasing to me that it found its home in you.
Well, that's a great note to wrap up on. And oh, well, we just got some more questions. So
Uh-oh.
I know. Well,
Go ahead. No, happy to.
From Ben, another challenging, I can already see another challenging question. Always refreshing and enlightening to find some new perspectives and new angle that expands my mind. What is your perspective on rate of social change in Black Lives Matter?
I think we're having an intensified moment now. And the bottom line is nobody knows. We don't know if this intensification of attention will last, or something new will displace it and disrupt attention and go elsewhere. But what's heartening to me is that even though Black Lives Matter is a formal organization, does have a leader and a 10-year history and such, but in the way that it's caught on now, it's disseminated, and there's a participation in it by so many different parts of society. So you can take the police aspect, and that's expected, and it'll be fought over, but something will shift. How much, we don't know. But corporations could never really even take the idea of male-female equity. They've talked about it forever, and it just never happened. But now with Black Lives Matter, corporations have taken their own leadership role and have changed their ads and have changed their requirements for committees and promotions and human resource departments. So what is really heartening to me is that it is seeping into all aspects of society and taking leadership from those who are in those parts of society. And I pray that that leadership and that support, because it's not just from the leadership, it's seeded and imbued, I think, now in the public's consciousness. And may that continue and strengthen and lead to ever better outcomes.